Just imagine for a moment being ripped from your home,
Well, yeah.
forced onto a train,
Mm.
crammed in with thousands of others, and no idea where you're going.
Whoa.
That was the reality for so many during the Holocaust.
Uh-huh.
Hundreds of thousands, especially the Warsaw Ghetto.
Right.
And that's what we're diving deep into today, this horrific chapter. The timeline, those conditions, and even some stories of resilience that somehow came out of all of this.
It's important we remember that the Warsaw Ghetto wasn't just suffering, that
Right.
it was a community.
Yeah.
This whole microcosm of Jewish life just struggling to survive under,
Nazi oppression. Okay, so let's
Oh.
unpack that a bit.
Mm.
To really understand the Warsaw Ghetto, we had to kind of set the stage. So it's 1939. Nazi Germany has occupied Poland.
Mm-hmm.
They started systematically persecuting the Jewish population.
And what's really interesting is the way they did this. It was so calculated. It's not just random violence. It was step by step, taking away rights, taking their property, and ultimately, forcing them into these ghettos like Warsaw.
The scale of it is just mind-blowing. They basically built a walled-off prison in the city, crammed almost 400,000 people into an area, barely bigger than a square mile.
And the conditions were just horrible. Disease was everywhere, from the overcrowding, lack of sanitation,
Of course.
starvation, a constant threat. Just hard to imagine surviving that.
And yet they did.
Yeah.
Our sources describe these incredible acts of resilience. Even with all this suffering, people in the ghetto set up schools, orphanages.
Yeah.
They even had newspapers and theaters.
It's like they refused to let the Nazis win, to crush their spirit completely.
Totally.
And that's a really key point here, because despite the horror, the people in the Warsaw Ghetto, they held on to their humanity.
They did.
They made art, they educated their children, kept their traditions alive. It really says something about their strength. I mean, imagine facing that kind of adversity. It's heartbreaking, but so inspiring.
It is. But there was a much darker plan already unfolding. We need to talk about the Wannsee Conference, January 1942.
Right.
This is where the top Nazi officials got together and discussed what they called the final solution to the Jewish question.
And that's where the bureaucratic side of the Nazi regime is just chilling, right?
Yeah.
The Wannsee Conference wasn't some hate-filled rally. It was just bureaucrats.
Calmly.
Yeah, just discussing
Yeah.
the logistics of genocide like it was a construction project,
Wow.
not, the extermination of millions.
And in charge of all this was Reinhard Heydrich. So ruthless, even other Nazis called him the man with the iron heart.
Yeah.
And he was tasked with orchestrating the final solution.
Right.
And the Wannsee Conference was a major step in making that plan a reality.
And one thing that really stands out is how the conference shows the terrifying efficiency of the Nazi regime. They approached genocide with this cold, methodical way, turning hate into just a bureaucratic process.
It's almost impossible to grasp that level of evil.
Yeah.
The sheer scale of what they were planning.
Yeah.
And for the people in the Warsaw Ghetto, the consequences of this plan were about to become devastatingly clear.
It all came to a head on July 22nd, 1942.
Right.
The day the mass deportations began.
This is where the Nazis' skill with deception really comes in.
Yeah.
They put up notices everywhere in the ghetto, promising bread and jam to anyone who showed up at this specific deportation point. Can you imagine just clinging to any shred of hope, so desperate for food that you'd actually believe that?
It's really hard to judge people's choices in those situations. I mean, when you're starving, living in fear, that promise of food could seem like the only option.
One of our sources really paints this heartbreaking picture. A father carrying his little son, walking to that deportation point, reassuring him that his mother's waiting there, promising him bread. Just a stark reminder of the human cost of this whole tragedy.
And that destination, of course, wasn't bread and safety.
Oh.
It was the Treblinka extermination camp.
Another layer of deception, right?
Right.
Treblinka was made to look like a transit camp with fake tickets, a clock at the station, promises of baths, and relocation further east.
All designed to keep things calm and prevent panic until it was too late.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just unbelievable, the level of cruelty, the deception involved.
And yet, even then, even in the ghetto, facing that, there were sparks of resistance.
You're talking about the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, right?
Exactly. But even before that organized uprising, you had these acts of defiance,
Okay.
little rebellions against the Nazis. One source talks about a young Jewish woman hiding in a boarded up room, watching German soldiers through a crack in the window.
Wow.
She knew if they found her, that was it.
Right.
But she and others, they chose to resist.
That must have taken incredible courage. What did that early resistance look like?
Smuggling in weapons,
Okay.
building hidden bunkers,
Mhm.
setting up communication networks, all right under the Nazis' noses. Oh, incredibly. But it showed their spirit. They wouldn't give up.
Yeah.
Wouldn't give in to despair.
And then it all led to the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising in April 1943.
Yes. A last stand, really, against the Nazi machine.
Knew they couldn't win.
They knew. Totally outgunned, outmanned.
Yeah.
But they chose to fight, to die on their own terms, rather than be sent to the camps.
Such a testament to the human spirit. To find that strength, that defiance, even in those times.
Absolutely. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, even though it was crushed, it stands as a symbol of resistance against tyranny. It reminds us that even when the odds are stacked against you, the will to fight for freedom can survive.
And Nazis, in their cruelty, they systematically destroyed the ghetto.
Yes.
Block by block, building by building.
Yeah.
Those who weren't killed in the fighting, they met a grim fate.
Many were sent to the camps, to Treblinka, a place designed for mass murder. And it's important to understand the sheer horror of that place.
So let's talk about Treblinka. What can you tell us about it?
It was located about 50 miles northeast of Warsaw, hidden away, surrounded by forests and swamps.
Yeah.
The Nazis really tried to hide what was happening there. They even planted flowers to disguise it from the air.
It's chilling, how they tried to mask their crimes with these ordinary things.
Deception was key for them, but the truth came out eventually.
Yeah.
A Soviet war correspondent, Vasily Grossman, he visited the site after the war. He described a scene that's really stayed with me. He wrote about the earth like it was ejecting the remains of what happened there.
Oh, wow.
Crushed bones, teeth, scraps of clothing, like the ground itself couldn't hide it anymore.
That image is just horrifying. A reminder of what happened there. How many people were murdered at Treblinka?
The exact number, it's unknown. But historians think at least 700,000 in just 15 months.
My God.
To put that into perspective, that's about 1,500 people killed every hour.
It's hard to even comprehend that number, the sheer scale of it.
It's truly incomprehensible. And the way the Nazis did it so efficiently with that cold, calculated approach, it's both terrifying and just baffling.
They had trains coming in every day, packed with thousands. They built those gas chambers to kill as many as possible, as quickly as possible.
It was a horrifying system of death, a testament to what humans are capable of when driven by hate.
This is all so heavy, almost impossible to process. What are we supposed to do with this knowledge? With the weight of it all?
It's a question we all have to grapple with, I think. For me, the most important thing is to remember, to learn from this dark part of history, and to use that knowledge to fight against intolerance, against prejudice today.
It's easy to say never again, but how do we actually make sure of that?
That's the challenge, isn't it? It takes constant vigilance, speaking out against injustice, educating ourselves and others about the dangers of hate and discrimination. We can't let ourselves become complacent.
Yeah, we can't just stand by and do nothing, can we?
We can't. We
Yeah.
owe it to the victims, to ourselves, to make sure this never happens again.
We have a responsibility, don't we? To learn from all of this, to recognize those warning signs of intolerance and hatred, and really work to stop something like this from ever happening again.
Absolutely. Never forget the Warsaw Ghetto, Treblinka, all the victims of the Holocaust. Their stories have to be a warning, a stark reminder of what can happen when hatred takes hold.
It can feel overwhelming, though, right?
Right.
The sheer scale of it all. You wonder what difference one person can even make.
It's understandable to feel that way, but even the smallest acts matter.
Yeah.
Acts of resistance, of just being kind, of speaking out when you see injustice. It can all have a ripple effect. We can't let the past paralyze us.
So what can we do? I mean, practically speaking, in our everyday lives, how do we combat intolerance and discrimination?
Well, first we have to educate ourselves and others about the dangers of prejudice and hate speech. And we need to recognize how bias can show up, even in our own thoughts and actions.
So it's about being more aware, being mindful of those biases, and actually challenging them.
Exactly. And being willing to speak up. When we see injustice, even when it's tough or uncomfortable, staying silent just makes you complicit.
We have to be allies, right, to those who are marginalized, who are being targeted.
Yes. We have to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. And we have to remember this fight against intolerance, it never ends. It's not something you can just check off a list and forget about. It needs constant work, education, and action.
The story of the Warsaw Ghetto, it's such a tragedy.
Yeah.
It reminds us of how cruel humans can be. But even in all that darkness, there are those glimmers of hope.
Right.
Stories of resilience, courage, the human spirit enduring.
Think of those who kept creating art, kept teaching, kept caring for each other, even when faced with unimaginable suffering.
Mhm.
Those acts of defiance, of holding on to their humanity, it's powerful.
It shows that the Warsaw Ghetto wasn't just about suffering. It was about life, love, and fighting for dignity. Their stories are important because they remind us that even in the darkest times, the human spirit can endure, can find hope and resilience even in the face of despair. This has been, well, a deeply moving and challenging conversation. As we wrap up our deep dive into the Warsaw Ghetto, what's one thing you want our listeners to take away? Something to think about as they grapple with this difficult history.
I think the story of the Warsaw Ghetto and the Holocaust as a whole, it asks us really profound questions about what it means to be human.
Hmm.
It forces us to look at the worst of humanity, to see how easily societies can fall into barbarity. But it also reminds us of the power of resistance, the
Yeah.
importance of empathy and compassion, and the strength of the human spirit.
The Warsaw Ghetto shows both the horrors that we're capable of and the incredible resilience of the human spirit. Let those stories remind us to fight injustice, to hold on to our own humanity, and to work towards a world where something like this never happens again. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Thank you for having me. It's been an honor to share these stories.